Hello!
Hello, everybody. One and all, welcome to Factoraly. Hello, Bruce.
Hello, Simon. Today, you may spot a bit of toilet humour.
It won't be a crap episode.
No, but you might be flushed at the end.
No, that's all I've got. So, the more astute of our listeners may have noticed that we're talking about toilets today.
That we
That'll
are.
be fun. If you're new to this, if you're uninitiated, Bruce and I love random facts and useless knowledge. And each week we pick a subject that you really wouldn't think would have any interesting stuff involved in it. We pick the most mundane topics, we pick them apart, and it turns out they're quite interesting.
Well, generally speaking, it seems that the more boring the subject matter seems to be on the surface, the more interesting it is when you scratch that surface and have a look underneath.
Yes, absolutely.
Unless, of course, it's a toilet where if you scratch the surface, it's not very pleasant.
That's something very different, yes.
Yeah.
To quote Blackadder, how lucky you English are to find the toilet so amusing. For us, it's a mundane and functional item. For you, the basis of an entire culture. So that is the culture that we shall explore today.
Yes. So when did this culture of toilets start, do we think?
Well, it depends how one defines a toilet. Mankind, animal kind, have been defecating, for a very long time. We've done it out in the open. We've used nearby rivers to carry our waste away. So we've been going to the toilet, in inverted commas, in one form or another, forever. But the idea of an enclosed area, a specific space that is used for that purpose, as most things do, it goes back to the Greeks, it goes back to the Romans, it goes back quite a way.
To the Egyptians, I think, as well.
Oh, really? I didn't read that.
Yes.
Well, I suppose it would, wouldn't it? Yeah.
Yes, they use the Nile apparently as a system to carry away their waste.
Okay. Hopefully they weren't in denial, because that would be messy. Do you know anything about the toilets of those eras?
I understand that they were sort of very public, sort of communal things. I mean, these days we have like walls between each stall.
Yes.
Whereas then they just had a plank of wood with holes in it that dropped down somewhere, and there were various different ways, either into a pit or into a gully with running water or whatever.
Yes, in some sort of stream.
But it was a very sociable place to go and have a chat.
You'd all sort of sit next to each other, right close up next to each other, cheek by jowl.
So to speak.
But
they were quite healthy places, weren't they?
in terms of cleanliness
Yes.
and so on, yeah. So they had, they weren't just doing their business in an open pit or anything. Like you said, there was a plank of wood. Everything was sort of slightly covered over. They cleaned themselves with a sponge on the end of a stick, which they then dipped into a gully of fresh flowing water to rinse, and then handed it to the next person to use. Whether that's clean by today's standards?
So would you hand it to them by the handle?
You would hope so, yeah. There are some who say that that's where we get the phrase to grab the wrong end of the stick.
Right. Yeah, you wouldn't want to do that.
You really
that
wouldn't.
would be a bad
you really
thing.
wouldn't want to do that.
I read somewhere that if you were like an emperor or somebody very posh, they used swans' necks.
Really?
Yes.
Were they dead?
No.
Oh. Oh, the poor swan.
Yes. But then
That's
the swan
terrible.
could go swimming and
Sure.
and dive in and kind of like do that thing that swans do where they kind of like an undulation
Yes.
to get rid of whatever was on their neck.
Well, that's a bizarre image, isn't it? So yes, that was the Romans. And then sort of from then on, people just used whatever space was available. They might have a hole out in the field. They might just, as we've said, sort of go and use a nearby river. Come the medieval period, you sort of used a pot, which is the origin of the potty. Sort of the chamber pot type thing, But
Well, that would have been in the
medieval
bedroom, wouldn't
era.
it? Because it's a
Yeah.
chamber.
Exactly. If you were slightly wealthier, you might have a dedicated room. I almost said a defecated room.
Well, that would work as
It
well.
would still work.
Yeah.
You would have a room, a private room, a privy, if you will, where you went and did your business. some of those were rooms that sort of stuck out of the wall. If you're in the higher echelons of society in a castle, perhaps.
I was going to say, I've seen those in castles. They were called guard-robes or something. Was it garde-robe?
Yeah, so guard-robes, the area where you sort of went to the toilet was adjacent to the place where you got cleaned, dressed, etc. So you kept your robes there. So the area was called the guard-robe, which eventually became the wardrobe.
Ah.
Yes, and this room would sort of jut out of the wall over a moat or a pit or whatever, and there you go. So you had a room that was dedicated for your ablutions and your cleaning and your getting dressed, which, if we look at the etymology of the word, we like a little bit of etymology here.
We do that.
Where does this word come from? The word toilet comes from the 16th century word toilette, which meant a cloth or a wrapping. And then by the 17th century, that meaning became dressing or clothing as a verb, to clothe yourself. Then by the 19th century, toilet meant the place where you'd performed your ablutions, you got dressed, etc.
Ablutions, that's a good word.
So the ablutions come from the Latin word ab, meaning away, and luere, meaning wash. So ablure, ablute, ablution means to wash away.
Ah.
So, do you know who was responsible for the first actual flushing toilets? We've talked about doing it over a pit. We've talked about doing it in a pot and then throwing it away. Do you know when actively flushable water toilets came around?
I don't. Tell me.
1592.
That's a lot earlier than I thought you were going to. I thought you were going to say like 18th century or something.
Yes.
But
yes.
16th century is quite early.
It is quite early, isn't it? So this was a gentleman called John Harrington, who was the godson of Queen Elizabeth I. He was an author, a translator, a member of the court. He got banished from court for, as far as I can tell, telling lewd jokes.
Now, if you're going to be banished from court, obviously Queen Elizabeth, like Queen Victoria, was not amused.
No. So much so that she threw him out. So he was banished to Somerset. What a punishment. He built himself a house near Bath. He invented for himself an indoor toilet with what we would recognise as a cistern, really.
Wonder where that went. Because you'd have to flush it too somewhere, wouldn't you? I suppose into a local river or something. Maybe.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we still haven't got to the point of having sewage networks,
No.
but who cares where it goes once it's been flushed out of your house? It's someone else's problem. But yes, a box containing water high above the place where you were doing your business. Pull a lever or open a hatch, water comes down, flushes the waste away. In his design, it was a vertical pipe, so it went straight down to wherever it was that it went, which was obviously a little bit whiffy. But that was his invention, 1592. Queen Elizabeth I eventually forgave him for his lewdness. She went and visited him in his new house. She saw his toilet. She was rather impressed by it. She commissioned him to make her one. So Queen Elizabeth I had an indoor flushing toilet.
Wow.
Which had velvet and lace around the general seating area and sort of dried herbs and fragrant twigs and things scattered around the place to mask the smell.
Fabulous. If you'd said to me, did Elizabeth I have a flushing toilet? I would have said no.
Oh, automatically, yeah, instantly. I would have said no until I researched that. It was around the Victorian era that there was something about the smells, wasn't there? Because all of the waste, wherever the waste came from, it just drained into the Thames.
Yes, in London.
If you're in London,
there was the thing called the Great Stink.
The Great Stink.
And there are great cartoons of people kind of like holding their noses whilst they're being barged across the Thames and sort of using nosegays, which is sort of like a handkerchief dipped in very strong perfume, so that you can kind of hold that to your. No, it's almost like a gas mask, like holding it to your face so that you can actually smell something nice rather than the disgusting effluent that was coming out of all of the pipes coming into the Thames. And it was so bad that the monarch commissioned somebody to actually make it better. And the person they commissioned to do that was a chap called Bazalgette.
Yes.
Who was tasked with coming up with a sewer system for the whole of London. And
That's no small task, is it?
no, it's a mammoth thing to do. And it resulted in things like, for example, the Strand used to be, I mean, the Strand is kind of like a beach. But if you look at where the Strand is now, it's miles away from the Thames. And the reason it's miles away from the Thames is because Bazalgette built these massive sewer systems running alongside the Thames and covered them over. So people could actually build on the sewage system.
Right.
And sort of made the Thames a lot narrower than it once was.
Yeah.
And
so I think I'm sort of thinking of the Victoria embankment on the north side of the Thames. That was all just constructed to cover over the sewers.
Yes.
Huh.
So the river was started to be cleaned up. He built lots of sewage processing plants to remove all of the nasty stuff from the water and then put it back into the Thames.
Yeah.
So Bazalgette, from his offices in Sloane Square, which are now a private club, he created these plans. And you can see actually in this club they have some of the plans that he made to produce the sewerage system for London. And that meant that more people could have inside toilets or toilets at their house at least.
Yes.
In Victorian London.
Yes.
Because I guess if you look at the Victorian sort of sprawl of housing, most of that did have toilets, but they were actually not in the house.
Okay. Yes. So they were sort of outhouses, weren't they?
Yes, but quite a lot of it was public toilets at the end of the street, and not just in the UK. There were public toilets everywhere. The French made an art of the public toilet with le pissoir.
Ooh, tell us about the pissoir.
Well, you may have seen it in LOLO. It's like a round, sort of circular metal building that has collectors for urine inside for men.
Yes, of course.
Because most public toilets were for men. In fact, there were no public toilets for women at all until quite late in the Victorian era.
Really?
So women could not go unless they were visiting a friend.
Yeah.
They could not go to the loo when they were out in public.
Oh, for goodness sake.
I know. Times have moved on.
They have. Thank goodness for that.
And in fact, one of the first female public toilets in the world is not 300 metres from where I am now.
Oh, really?
It's at Britannia Junction in Camden Town.
Right.
And that was that was the very first ladies' toilet.
Is that so?
Yes.
Interesting. Well, that's a bit of history right there, isn't it?
There's also another public toilet not far from here in Primrose Hill, which is a recording studio. So
That's so London.
I know. So a lot of these toilets were like below ground, and you sort of go down some stairs into this very tiled Victorian style place. And a lot of them, when they were decommissioned, were repurposed as either storage. Some of them are server farms because they're underground, so there's a sort of like a constant thing, and also there's flowing water, so that'll
a couple of them are
cool.
Couple of them are bars, aren't there?
Yes, there's a bar. In fact, there's a bar in Kentish Town, which is a toilet.
Excellent.
So after you've been to the loo, I mean, whether you use a swan's neck or a stick with a sponge on the end of it, these days we kind of use paper.
Yes.
But it's not a new thing using toilet paper. In fact, in the 2nd century, Chinese were using a sort of a rudimentary paper.
Really?
They did that for a while, but the first modern toilet paper was also in China, but it was like late 14th century.
Okay.
And of course, it was for the emperor's family, and each sheet of paper was perfumed and ornate and fabulous. And,
right.
And then when paper became more available, like in the 15th, 16th century, it was quite expensive, so you wouldn't really use it to wipe your bottom with.
Yeah.
But then time passed, and then you get to Victorians, and Victorians being Victorians and being hugely inventive. There's a chap called Joseph Gaiety, which I love his name. Gayetty. Gaiety.
Sounds like a fun fella.
I know. And he created the first commercially packaged toilet paper in 1857.
Really?
And these were sort of like a pack of A4, but toilet paper. So it was like loose, flat sheets of paper.
Right.
He was actually American. this chap.
Right.
And he founded the Gaiety firm for toilet paper production in New Jersey. And his first factory-made toilet paper was called the Therapeutic Paper. And also people called it Gaiety's Medicated Paper.
Oh, that's a very Victorian name.
I know, but it didn't work.
Oh, why not?
I think he probably had to charge so much money for it that he couldn't do it.
Okay.
But then the British got involved. And in 1879, a chap called another great name for somebody who's involved in the toilet business, Walter Olcock. A bit like Ballcock, but without the B.
Okay, fine.
So he created toilet paper on a roll.
Oh, right, okay.
And he was the first that used perforated toilet roll instead of just flat sheets of toilet paper. I
see.
And it was amazing. I mean, suddenly toilet paper took off. And the Germans got in on the act and the French. And then it got to the point where companies like Scott,
right,
the big paper company, were making a lot of toilet paper.
Yeah.
Toilet paper then was quite rough. I mean, there were splinters in toilet paper.
Oh, that's not
good. You don't want to. That's a specific place where you do not want to splinter.
Definitely.
So they decided that it needed to be softer, and there was a paper mill in Scotland that started to make 2-ply toilet paper,
right, okay,
and much softer. And today, sort of 2-ply toilet paper is pretty much the standard.
Yes.
And that's been around since sort of the 1940s. But
really?
it's a huge industry.
Now I remember as a child going to the toilets at school, and the toilet paper was essentially like tracing paper. Yes. It was very hard.
Bronco.
And crinkly.
I remember the brand Bronco toilet paper. And it was like folded in half and interleaved. So as you picked out one, another one would pop out.
Another one came out, that's right. But it was very sort of, it was very rough and crunchy and uncomfortable on one side, and sort of really shiny and easily
useless.
Skiddable.
Yes.
On the other side.
But people used to use other sorts of paper, didn't they?
Yeah, people have used all sorts of things. The newspapers, magazines. Again, hopefully not the glossy ones. I think before your American chap invented his toilet paper, some Americans in rural America used to use used corn cobs.
Oh, wow. Well, that makes sense.
It kind of does, doesn't it? Without getting too graphic about it. If you picture that kind of does make sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There'd be one use only, I would imagine.
Oh, one would hope. Yeah, absolutely. But yes, people have used just any old rags or bits of material they could find around. In fact, there's a particular mention of a magazine, the Farmer's Almanac, which was a popular paper for farmers, telling you all the latest news about farming and agriculture. That was a regular thing that people used in place of toilet paper. And the Farmer's Almanac was so aware of the fact that that's what people used it for. Once they'd read it, it was a quality production. They actually started producing it with a couple of holes drilled in to the top of the almanac.
So you could put a bit of string through.
Precisely, so you could hang it up. That was in.
They didn't make it perforated as well.
But yes, that was in 1919.
Wow.
Again, it always does, but it makes me think of another Blackadder quote. They're in the trenches, and George brings out a copy of King and Country, and he says, "You can't deny this magazine is good for the morale of the men." Blackadder says, "No, not at all. I just think something better could be achieved by giving them some real toilet paper." So it was a common thing to use magazines and papers and whatever else you could find lying around.
So you can do crosswords on the toilet. People do a lot of thinking on the toilet. The other thing that people tend to do on the toilet is die.
Not where I thought we were going.
But no, I mean, people have been dying on the toilet since time immemorial, practically. There was a King Ironside of England was stabbed whilst defecating in a toilet in 1016. Even in Rome, there was a chap called Elagabus, who was murdered by the Praetorian Guard in a latrine in which he had taken refuge.
Really?
So yeah, and yes, but loads and loads of people. George II
died on the toilet.
He collapsed shortly after attending to his close stool.
Oh, I see. Yes, that's very much the same thing.
They think probably of something like an aortic aneurysm, which, if you're
Right.
overstraining, that can happen to you. Judy Garland died on a toilet.
No. Really?
Yep. Yeah. Admittedly, she was on barbiturates, but she did die on a toilet.
Okay.
And obviously the most famous one, eating a burger on a toilet, was
the king.
Elvis Aaron Presley.
Indeed.
I mean, and most recently, back in 2022, rapper Coolio
Right.
died of a heart attack on a toilet while at a friend's house.
Oh.
So people are continuing to die on toilets.
Huh.
I imagine that ambulances must be called to the toilet quite frequently because it does put a strain on your body, doesn't it, when you're going to the loo. We have lots of names for the toilet as well, don't we?
We do have a few, don't we? I wonder whether this sort of comes from our English prudishness. We don't want to call it what it is.
Well, I think it's the Americans. The Americans are even more prudish than us, aren't they? We'll ask to go to the loo or the toilet in a restaurant. But Americans go, excuse me, where's the restroom?
The restroom, yes. Or the washroom.
Washroom, yeah.
So go on. What other euphemisms do we have for the toilet?
There's loads. I mean, the lav for lavatory.
Yep.
The latrine. The Americans call things like the John.
Yeah, I have no idea why they call it the John.
I don't know why either.
There we go, listeners. Drop it in the comments.
Exactly. And then there's things like the powder room,
Yes.
where ladies go to powder their noses, which is exactly not what they're doing.
Definitely not.
And you mentioned the privy as well.
Yes, the private space, the privy, yeah.
Yeah, there's just an awful lot of words. The WC is
WC, so that's the water closet.
The water
which
closet.
is very technically accurate, isn't it? You have a box full of water in the shape of a cistern. That makes sense.
Yes. And interestingly, toilet water is not the water that goes in the toilet.
Right.
Because toilet water is what you were talking about earlier, with toilet being where you sort of get ready to go out. So that was the water that you put on before you went out. So eau de toilette.
Eau de toilette, yes. Water of the toilet, yes.
Yes. And then because the British sort of conquered the world at some point, we brought back a lot of words from other countries. Like we brought back some Indian words like kazi.
Really?
Yes.
Didn't know that. I always assumed that was German.
There are people who don't think that it was Indian, that they think it was just a Cockney word for toilet.
Oh, no, I think it sounds more interesting your way.
I like to think that as well.
Do you know where we get the word loo?
No, tell me.
So loo was a Scottish term from the 1700s, garde loo. That in itself came from an old French phrase, garde l'eau, which literally translates as watch out for the water.
Oh, right.
Which goes back to the medieval times. Again, you would use a pot inside the house. You would chuck the contents of the pot out the window. You'd want to shout down to the street below.
Yes.
Watch out for the water.
Watch out.
Garde l'eau.
But I imagine if you were doing that as you chucked it out, that doesn't give you much of a chance to dance out of the way, does it?
It might be slightly too late, mightn't it? Yeah.
But then there are other countries, the Australians,
Yes.
call it the dunny.
Yes.
Which is something to do with Daddy's donut, isn't it? So there's
Is it?
The dunny is basically the loo seat. It is shaped like a donut.
Oh, that's
So-
brilliant. I like that.
Yeah, because there used to be there's a British word, dunnikin, which meant dung house.
Oh, all right. Okay.
And then people say, oh well, the dunny comes from
that.
from Dunnikin.
Right.
But I think it's the donut in Granny's greenhouse.
It's far more enjoyable.
And then at sea, of course, you don't call it the toilet.
Don't you? What do you call it?
You call it the head.
I beg your pardon.
You say, I'm going to the head.
I've never heard that before.
Have you not?
No.
So that the head was basically at the front of the ship, because the head's the head
Yes.
of the ship.
Right.
And you went in. There's sort of like a hole.
Yes.
And as you went, it would sort of wash away down the side of the ship.
That makes perfect sense. I don't know if they still do, but there was a time when Americans called it the crapper. But I believe they named it the crapper after an English toilet manufacturer called Thomas Crapper.
Aha. Now, I thought he invented the toilet, but he obviously didn't, because you talked about John Harrington.
That's why they call it the John.
Going to the John.
Brilliant. That is so obvious now you've said it out
Yes.
loud. Brilliant. Thank you for that. Puts our minds at ease. Yes, no, so Crapper didn't invent the toilet, as we've already discussed. They're older than that. But Thomas Crapper was an English plumber, I believe. around the mid 1800s, and he had a few patents for toilets. He modernised the way they work slightly. He patented the ballcock that you mentioned earlier on. Actually, he made developments in U-bends and S-bends and things like that to keep the whiff away from
of course.
the bottom of the toilet. So yes, he didn't invent them, but he did do quite a lot to modernise them. A lot of pottery companies, a lot of places that made porcelain around the Staffordshire area, started up a sideline of making toilets. There's a wonderful pottery museum in Stafford called the Gladstone Pottery, and they have an entire section of their museum purely dedicated to toilets. Fascinating place to go.
Brilliant. Toilet factories are fairly dull places, I imagine. But one of the more interesting ones is in Japan, because if we sort of bring it up to date, there's a fabulous manufacturer called Toto Toilets.
Right, okay.
And they're not in Kansas.
Not in Kansas anymore.
No, they're not.
Neither do they bless the rains down in Africa. They might. I don't know.
Yes, one of the few songs with the word Kilimanjaro in it.
And Serengeti.
Yes.
Interesting.
So Toto, you've probably heard of these toilets where you go to the loo and there's like flashing lights and a warm loo seat and
oh yes.
And I believe, Simon, you have used one of these toilets.
I have. I didn't realise they were called Toto. I didn't know what that's what we were talking about. But I have. Yeah, there's a wonderful place in London called Japan House, which is part exhibition space, part shop, part restaurant, dedicated to the Japanese culture. Wonderful place to go. And a friend of mine took me for dinner in the restaurant at Japan House one day, and he sort of leant across the table and said, "Before we go, you really need to go and visit the toilet." Which I thought was slightly suspicious. But I went to visit the toilet, and goodness me, he was right. You know, there's a panel on the wall full of buttons, and everything was sort of LED colour-changing lights, and the toilet seat sort of rose up automatically. The air dryer, the jet of air to dry yourself afterwards came as a bit of a shock because I didn't know it was coming. But yes, I've never had such a luxurious visit to the bathroom.
They are amazing.
Yeah.
They are absolutely stunningly things. I am. If they weren't eye-wateringly expensive, you have to be sitting down when somebody tells you the price, and ideally you're not sitting on the toilet. Go on then. They are so expensive. They are thousands of pounds, these things.
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
They're ridiculous. But
I think
they are worth every penny, I believe.
Now, that's a handy little segue there. I often like to do sort of records, you know, the biggest this, the most expensive that, the largest number of the other.
Yes.
I had a little look at the most expensive toilets in the world, other than Toto, as you've just mentioned. In Japan, there is a toilet which is covered in Swarovski crystals and diamonds. On the outside.
I was going to say, you wouldn't want to be sitting on that, really.
You wouldn't want to be sitting on it, and probably not that practical to have the inside of the bowl studded with them either, you know, for cleanliness purposes. That's worth $128,000. That's not the most expensive one. There's a company in China called the Hung Fong Gold Technology Company who make stuff out of gold.
Of course they do.
And they have an exhibition called the Hall of Gold Fame, and they have various golden artifacts in there. They have a golden toilet, which is worth $4 million.
Sorry, say that again?
$4 million.
For a toilet?
Yeah. I don't think it's necessarily usable. I think it's there as a display of what they can do if they really wanted to. But even that is not the most expensive toilet in the world.
Go on then.
The most expensive toilet in the world is... Well, actually, it's not in the world. It's on the International Space Station. The toilet facilities on the International Space Station cost $5 million. And essentially, it's a small suction device with straps that you can sort of harness onto yourself to fix it in place. And it sucks your waste out. It has a filtration system inside it to filter the water out of your waste, clean it up, and recycle it as drinking water for the crew on the space station. $5 million worth of loo.
That's interesting, because I thought you were going to go for $2 million.
No. Why stop there?
Well, see, $2 million is just one urinal.
There's a urinal worth $2 million.
There is a urinal worth $2 million.
Go on, where's that?
And it's a piece of art that was created by Marcel Duchamp
Okay.
in 1917. And it's just an ordinary thing, but he signed it R. Mutt,
Right.
and it's worth $2 million. It is a very well known piece of art.
Right.
It's called Fountain.
Okay.
I can't think of anything else that I really want to say about toilets. Can you?
No, I'm sure there are many other things we could talk about, but I can't think of anything else I really want to talk about.
But people might, so that's where they can. Well, first of all, they should like, subscribe, and as we've mentioned several times in this episode, comment.
Comment on it. Whether good or bad, it's all valued feedback. And if you've enjoyed listening to us, then good, you're our kind of person.
Thank you very much, and listen again.
Yeah, listen again. Tell your friends about it. The more the merrier. So thank you for listening. Please come again. We've been Simon Wells.
And we've been Bruce Fielding.
And this has been
Factoraly. Thank you.
Goodbye.
Cheerio.